Oakley dokley. So now I'm just going to make a new 2048 to start our texture. We can, I like to start high res, and then we can downsample to whatever we want later. And what I'm doing now is I'm grabbing photos. Now these are by no means my texture. Not in a million years am I going to use any of this stuff for my actual texture. I'm actually going to model out branches and leaves and whatnot so that we can get a super clean alpha and a super clean normal map. There's also some other benefits to modeling out your stuff, or at least in the case of tree canopies, there's some benefits to it which I'll talk about later. But for now I'm just grabbing some photos and kind of laying out like a rough draft of what my texture is going to look like. I'm just planning things out, how much of my texture space I want to use, and how many branches I want to have on my texture and everything. And I didn't record myself looking for branches, but I did spend a little bit of time looking for good branches that I thought are dynamic and are going to work well. And we'll see if they would look well later. They might not, in which case we're kind of going to have to go back to the drawing board in terms of what branch we plan out here. Now I'm just using just a Photoshop brush with my Wacom tablet mapped to size, no opacity pressure, and I'm just drawing out some of the more crucial, or at least in my opinion, the more crucial branches, so that I'll have something easier to see when I'm actually modeling, so that I'm not like trying to interpret this mess here. I just want to have some nice clean branches to follow, and these brush strokes are going to have nothing to do with my texture either. These are all just part of the planning process. I really do this for every important texture. I plan out where I want things to be, and how big I want them to be, how much texel density I want to reserve for them. It's just something I do. It's how my brain works. I know not everyone does it like that, but I do. I just organize kind of how I want my texture to be. Certainly before I make like a high poly model of anything, I will plan my texture out. And now I'm drawing these red lines to make sure that when I map a polygon, like when I make like an alpha branch out of this, it's not going to cross over anything else I don't want it to cross over. I'm just making sure that there's enough space to do that, to make sure that it's not my alpha card isn't overlapping any other random alpha bits. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I'm sure you'll understand later when you see. Okay, now I'm saving my PSD file, and I'm actually saving it in the spot that the game engine is going to reference it eternally. I'm saving it in the build exactly where I want this texture to live, and I think that's a really important habit to get into. Now I'm saving off the CryTIFF, by the way, right here. That's the proprietary CryEngine codec, which is what the engine I'm authoring this tree for. I see people save, just while they're working, they save their stuff in some giant directory on their desktop or whatever, just while they're working. And I think that that's a bad idea, because there's always going to be, if you are authoring for a game engine, there's always going to be that one point where you are tasked with moving everything to where it actually ought to live, and that can be really annoying sometimes. So why not just save it right where you want it to be? Okay, now I like to keep everything in one giant max file, so I'm just making a new layer called Branch Baker, and that's where I'm gonna start making my high poly branch, which I'm gonna bake down to make my branch texture. Just pretty much everything that pertains to my oak tree I'm gonna keep in one giant file, in one giant max file, and organize it with layers. That's the way I work. You can make another max file or whatever tickles your fancy, if you like being like immoral.
Just kidding.
Okay, and now I've just dropped that that kind of template I made, just drag and dropped it right into the max viewport on this plane I made, and I am just copying or adhering to that template I drew out based on the photo reference. So this is a very similar process to our tree trunk for all these alpha branches. Now keep in mind that the meshes I'm going to be creating now are meshes only for the purpose of baking our texture, baking our diffuse and our normal. They're not going to be meshes that are going to be put on our tree in any way. So they can be as high poly as you want. I'm just playing some music there. So that's why you see when I'm drawing these lines, I'm putting way more points than I put on my trunk because the poly count doesn't matter right now. And you don't have to stick exactly to the template, obviously, because that template was just based off some photo, just some random photo. And these lines are even more arbitrary. I mean, these black lines that I've drawn. So it's really just a guide. And I've created my circle, and I'm going to loft that circle along. And right now I am just trying for the life of me to find a way to loft a bunch of lines at the same time. And I failed, so back to the old do it 5 million times strategy for each line. Again, if there is a way to loft multiple lines at once, please let me know. I'd love to know that. It would save me a lot of time. So same exact thing that I did for the trunk. I'm using the scale deformer to give these guys the right thickness and taper. And I'm just going to have to go through and do all of these branches. So since you guys have already seen this before, and I'm sure you all understand what I'm doing by now, I'm just going to fast forward kind of really quickly through this next section here until we get to another exciting part. Okay, I fast forward and skipped through some parts. So and now I'm at the point now where I'm going to start giving this thing some depth. So I've just selected all the lines with the object selector dialog thing. I don't know what it's called. And I'm just going into sub-object mode of my lines. Of course, this is the lines are still being referenced by the lofts, so this will be affecting my lofts as well. And I'm just giving them a little bit of a, Z-ness to them, some depth. And even though this will be baked down to a flat texture, that since it is going to have a normal map and everything, this is going to come through that, the branches in Z is going to come through a little bit in the normal map and in the diffuse, so it's good to do that. Now, moving one vert by one vert was getting pretty tedious, so I decided just to enable soft selection, which is enabled, just like you can enable it in with an editable poly, you can enable it when you're working with your line as well. So it makes it a lot faster. Interesting noises outside my window. Now it's important to keep in mind the order that you give these things depth, because if you start to give a branch on the outside, if you move its first vert somewhere, you're gonna have to make sure that the other branches align correctly with that, you know, so they're all are growing out of each other. So it's probably a good idea to work like the middle, the thickest branch first, and then kind of fan your way out. I kind of started it with just kind of a random branch, which was a bad idea. You guys can learn from my mistakes. What I'm doing now, I like copied some lofts as opposed to actually making brand new lines, so they're still instanced. So when I modified the lines, it also modified the loft that I'd copied in a couple different places, so I had to kind of move them around. It's kind of confusing, but it's not anything crucial. And I'm just about done, so I've copied all the lofts off and collapsed them so that I can kind of see everything in one color. Looks a little weird, not gonna lie. Looks kind of like a claw or something, but you guys can make a better one. Now, I'm not even sure at this point if I'm gonna even need 2 branches. I don't know, maybe it'll add something, but we'll see. This is all kind of just, I mean, you gotta try stuff, right? In the past I've done trees with 1 branch and I've gotten some of them to look decent, but I wanted to try 2 branches this time around. So I encourage you guys to try stuff as well, even if you're not necessarily sure it's gonna work. It might look really cool, so you just have to try. There's no other, you know, not everything is gonna have like a tutorial laid out for you, exactly the correct way to do things. Sometimes if you want to push the envelope, you're gonna have to find new ways to do things. So you know, this is not like a rule. You don't have to have two branches if you're making an oak tree, 2 branches on your texture. It's just something I'm trying. So the important thing here is the technique of modeling it. One of the advantages to modeling out your branch among the other obvious ones, like getting a clean normal map and a clean alpha out of it, is that should you find that your texture, for whatever reason, is not yielding a very good canopy, perhaps the leaves are too dense and it's giving away your planes too easily, or perhaps your leaves are too sparse and your tree is not full enough, it's a lot easier, in my opinion, to modify a modeled out version, as long as you keep all your stuff intact. I mean, in terms of of all the things you use to build your branch up, as long as you keep it intact, and your leaves and your pivot points and everything, it's going to be a lot easier to modify your branch and quickly rebake it and then see how it looks again than it would be in Photoshop had you like done a bunch of crazy, I don't know, leaf copying tactics or whatever. I think it's, I don't know, I think it's easy to modify how your branch looks in the 3D app. However, it is it is pretty time consuming initially, just right off the bat, to actually model all this stuff out. And also you run the risk, if you're gonna model it out, you always run the risk that your model is not gonna look as good as a photograph, you know, which is bad. If your branch is looking crappier modeled out than it would if you just grabbed a photo off the internet and cut out the alpha or whatever, then, you know, that's a problem. Then it was all for nothing. That's why I take care to use the photo reference and copy it exactly, so that I'm 100% certain that my branch is going to have some photographic qualities to it. I think that's really important. And same thing with anything you're modeling out. Like if you're sculpting out bricks and baking them down in ZBrush or whatever, you better be damn sure that the bricks you're modeling out look as good as a photo or are as realistic as a photo. Otherwise, it's all for nothing. Now the second branch is going to be the exact same process. So instead of boring you guys, I'm just going to skip right through it. And here are my 2 branches. Same process for the second one as the first one, and now it's time to start adding leaves to our branches. Now I've grabbed a photo of a leaf, and that I'm going to use this leaf for two reasons. I'm going to use it as kind of reference, as you'll see here in a second, when I'm actually drawing out my leaf, and I'm also going to use it as an actual texture to map to the leaf, so that when I bake down my leaves to my texture, to my plane, it's gonna already have, like, you know, leaf diffuse on it, so that that'll spare me the process of, after having baked it, of having to go and, you know, grab a photo cutout of a leaf and kind of paste it all around in Photoshop. So this way my diffuse bake will just immediately have leaf texture on it. So now I'm just cutting it out, and the polys don't matter because this is going to be baked down, but I didn't go too high poly just because, you know, if I have 1,000 leaves or whatever on my branch, it's going to start bogging down my system if I have if I have this leaf super smooth. And really it's not going to matter that much anyway, because these leaves are going to end up being pretty small on my texture. So now I'm just kind of cutting it up because I'm OCD about n-gons and how messed up they can get sometimes with the lighting. So, and I'm just adding these quick slices down the middle to ensure that when I bend this leaf, which I will do for the normal map to give it a nice bow to it or whatever, and I'm going to bend it in all kinds of different ways. I'm going to have twisted leaves and such. I need to make sure that I have enough topology to do that. And a second ago I ran a weld on my whole thing, because when you're doing all this kind of cutting, sometimes you get two verts that are right next to each other, which is kind of excessive or gratuitous, not needed. So I just ran a quick weld. Okay, and now I'm drawing out my little mini twigger brancher, which is gonna you know, I have my kind of main branch, and then I have these little twiggers that come off of it that the leaves will attach to. So that's what I'm drawing out right now. And this can be, you know, I don't have many points there, as you can see, simply because it's going to be really small, and I don't think I need that many, and I don't want to bog down my machine too much. So instead of the loft, I actually didn't loft, I just used the little render in viewport trick, just that enable in viewport, which will just give it some thickness immediately. And you just need to make sure to click generate mapping chords, which really you should, there's no reason not to. I mean, if you want garbage UVs, you can make garbage UVs later if for any reason you want that. I don't know why you'd want that, but why not just give yourself clean UVs? I mean, it should be on by default, really. I don't see why it isn't. So I'm just giving them all thickness because they're so small. I don't think they would need a taper, and if they did have a taper, I think it would get too small at the end and the normal map wouldn't pick it up. So, and I'm just attaching them, turning them into editable polys, because they're so small. I don't really think I need to keep all the spline information and everything for them. I'm just deleting the end caps now, which I could have done just by dechecking end cap and start cap, but I forgot, so just doing it now. Which probably would have been faster just to undo and go back and delete them, but sometimes I like to do things the hard way just to mix it up. So I am looking at that reference a lot when I'm making these twigs. Now I'm just doing these cheap little nubs, as if, you know, a twig had like broken off at that point, and they're really sloppy, but it's fine because it's going to be so small. And I wouldn't have thought to do that had I not been looking at my reference, so it's extremely important. I'm just putting their pivot points at the base of their stems there. Because if you don't do this, it's a nightmare to place them. It's just really hard. So now I am duping. I duped one. I'm going to leave my original there, and I'm just going to start placing these all around. And what I'm using here is I'm just using the face snap. As you can see, my snaps is enabled, and I'm just with face snap enabled, I can just easily drag them, and they'll just kind of snap to faces. It won't go right into the, I mean, it's not perfect, right? Like sometimes it kind of sits on top a little just because it's snapping to the face, but it's going to be more than sufficient for our baking purposes. Now I'm putting all these twigs all over the place. I'm just kind of doing this without thinking, but if I really thought about this, this is a dumb idea. It's a dumb idea of me to do this right now. What I should have done is finished modeling out my leaves, and then attached all my leaves to the stem and then placed them around, because now I'm going to have a lot of leaf placing to do on all these little twigs. The benefit of this mistake that I'm making is that I am going to get a lot more uniqueness per each twig, since every leaf is going to be kind of placed, but it's going to take a heck of a lot longer, and that uniqueness might go unnoticed. So, and I do end up deleting some of these twigs and replacing fully dressed twigs, dressed with leaves. Now I'm finishing modeling out my leaf, which for some reason I took a little detour and made my twig. Not sure why I did that. So just giving it a tiny little bevel, just to get that little light beating up on the very corner of the leaf. So in all of this, I had welded before, and I'm beveling. It's kind of trashing my UVs, so I'm just gonna grab everything and just quick planar map again and just kind of refit it there to get my UVs perfect. And again, the only reason why we have this leaf mapped here is so that when we bake it, we have little leaf texture on all of our leaves. Now I'm going to make a couple versions of this leaf. Just kind of a bulged out one, like almost flat, but just with a little bulge to it. And I'm going to make a pretty bent one, and then I also made a twisted one. And now, just with the same face snaps, I am just duping them around and dressing up this little twig here. Okay, I have finished placing the leaves around on my two branches, and it was nothing special. I skipped over all that. It was pretty boring, and I made the miserable error of not putting my leaves on the little twigs first. So at some point I just had to go and do that. And now what I'm doing is I'm adding a bark texture to the actual branches, so that when I bake my diffuse down onto this plane, I immediately just have bark right off the bat. And I could just as easily just pull the alpha and put down some bark texture in Photoshop, but if I did that, then the bark wouldn't be running along the tangent of the branch, and I think it's just as easy to add it in Max. Of course, in this case it wasn't just as easy, because on some of the little branch lofts I had forgotten to press apply mapping, which really messed everything up. So that was kind of a little nightmare, but I eventually fixed it. So now I've combined everything into one mesh, and I've gone ahead with the bake. This is just my render buffer showing me my diffuse. The normal map is baked into a different location. I kept all my working files. I duped them off and put them in a different layer, as I always do. Now I'm just saving off this diffuse. And if you don't know how to bake textures, then you should watch our normal map baking video to learn how to do that. I'm not covering everything that I do in this tutorial, because the tutorial would be 20 hours long if I did that, and a lot of the things I'm doing are lessons in and of themselves. Okay, so bringing that bake in, and I have a similar policy in my Photoshop files as I do in my Max files. I leave everything in groups, all my working stuff. So this is a weird thing that I do to give the diffuse more depth, especially if I didn't have any ambient occlusion. I duped the normal map and desaturated it and overlaid it on top of my diffuse. Yeah, sometimes it can give a little bit more like shape or whatever to your diffuse. I usually have it pretty subtle. All this Photoshop stuff is probably going to be the hardest bit to follow, not because what I'm doing is super advanced or anything, just because I tend to mess around a lot in Photoshop with all kinds of crazy stuff. So my first goal here is to separate my my branches and my leaves into different layers, just so I can work with them separately. So what I did is I used the replace color in Photoshop, and I just chose green and changed it to white. And then now I'm doing a threshold to try to really separate out these two elements. As you can see, my leaves are white and my branch is more or less black. But I think that I could do a better job. So before I do it, I just did a quick levels, and now I'm trying it again with the replace color. And it looks like now I'm going the other way around. I'm deciding to make the leaves black and the branch white. And there we go. Now I have a nice clean separation. So I don't know how to get a selection out of black and white other than dropping it into my channels as an alpha and then control clicking on it. So that's what I did to get a selection out of it, and just now I use that selection to separate them out into different layers. Now I have separate control over what my branches look like and what my leaves look like. And this is just me kind of shooting in the dark here. Once I get it on our model and in the engine, I'm going to make some more Photoshop tweaks. Nothing special, just general value and color tweaks are generally something I do a lot of after I get it into the engine, because you really have no idea how it's going to look until it's on your model and in the engine. Okay, so that was the long and treacherous process of modeling out a canopy texture. And with that, I'm going to call this done for now. I think that doing any more work on this is just going to be kind of useless without seeing what it even looks like in the engine. So with the next video, we're going to make a canopy out of this thing.